Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and
Hello.
together we are ThinkerThemer, and we are checking out a new Euro from Capstone Games, who have kindly provided this review copy. It's launching at Essen, and it's called Stevens, and it's by Roller and Costa. That sounded really Australian. Roller and Costa. But be still my beige heart, because this game feels like a classic Euro and we can't wait to tell you more about it. So let's get into it.
So in Stevens, we are master glassmakers trying to make a name for ourselves, and we find ourselves in Portugal after the 1755 earthquake that Lisbon suffered through, which actually created the birth for this need of resources to reconstruct. And glass, William Stevens, who was a British individual, was like, wait a second, there's an opportunity here. And so he actually created the Stevens factory. And that's where we're going to be trying to make a name for ourselves. And the way we're going to do that is through making some clever investments, getting some contracts with the crown, as well as activating and supplying the different factories. As we're doing all of this, the Napoleonic invasion is going to be getting closer and closer. And so we want to try and be the absolute best glassmaker by the time that invasion happens.
Now, the turns in Stevens are relatively simple. On your turn, you can do one of two things. You can either take a piece of glass, and depending on where you take it from in the furnace, it's going to give you a particular action. Or alternatively, you can take one of these profession cards, place it on the side of the board that it corresponds to, pay its cost, and be able to unlock one of these discs and show that you have mastery in that profession. Another way of thinking about this is, do you want a short-term gain or a long-term reward? Because as the cards build out on either side of the board, and we're both adding to the professions on either side of the board, they are going to get activated and give us bonuses throughout the course of the game. So for example, if someone were to now take a blue piece of glass that represents glassware, it's going to activate all of the professions to the right of that action spot. At the moment, I'm the only person that has a profession here, or a disc on a profession here. And so I would get the choice of either getting one influence or an escudo, which is the coin or currency in the game. Now, why do I want to collect these resources? Well, one of the other actions you can do is take a piece of this plate glass, the clear cubes here, and that's going to allow me to access these different contracts. Now, these contracts I have to pay for in influence, and as you start to remove some of the discs in the game, it's going to enable you to purchase, maybe two instead of one contract, or get them at a discount of one influence or one coin, depending on which side you're drafting from. So I could take one of these at my discount of one for just one influence. And then this contract comes here on my player board, where I'm able to work towards paying it off. Once I've been able to pay off that contract, it's going to go to the left-hand side of my board. And what I'm looking for here to maximize my points is really differentiation in terms of the different types of contract. Now, alternatively, if I was to draft one of the cards on the right-hand side of the board, these are called investments. And you want investments because part of this game is going to be all of the players contributing to this shared economy. So for example, if I had taken this card and placed it here, during the cleanup phase after the round is complete, I'm going to be generating one of these pink cubes, which I believe...
Fabric,
thank you. I'm going to generate a piece of fabric, and this fabric can be sold to one of the small shops here on the board. Now you can see that you can provide different combinations of materials in order to get better benefits. Or for example, I could just sell this one cube here and gain 2 coin for the next round in the game. Now, interestingly, the things that you produce, you can't keep yourself, so you need to sell them to the small shops. And then in the following round, you can take those back as one of your actions, or anyone else can take them too, thereby creating this shared economy where it's also necessary to be contributing to these small shops so that you can get more income for the subsequent rounds. Now, you are also going to be able to get more powerful investment cards. For example, this one here, which is going to give you 2 pieces of pottery at the end of the round to sell back to the small shops. But it's going to come at a cost of sand. And so you can see that there is this forest and sand track that represent the natural resources that are required in order to generate these different goods. And having this here, generating those, is going to cost you that. And of course, the higher up you are, those tracks at the end of the game, the more points you're going to get. And so you need to find ways to build that back up across the course of the game. Now, outside of the shared economy, there's another interactive element of the game, and that is the second space that is available on some of these professions. Because here you can see I've had to pay the cost to put this profession here, but Maggie wants to contribute to this, so she can, on her turn, simply take one of the discs off her board and place it there too. Now, the discs that you have out on professions are going to give you victory points at the end of the game, but as I mentioned, depending on the action that's occurring, so in this case, when someone takes this pink piece of pink piece of fabric, it's going to trigger all of the cards that are here. And so Maggie is also going to benefit from that ongoing ability. But why do you want to take this off your board? Well, there's two reasons. Some of them, as I mentioned, are going to unlock additional benefits. For example, the ability to take more cubes in one go, or the ability to swap resources for other resources, or to, for example, clear the market and get new cards available there. So those are important things that you need throughout the course of the game. The other part of it is, of course, unlocking end of game scoring ability. So not much scores at the end of the game unless you've been able to unlock these discs here. For example, if I lifted this disc, it would give me 1 point per 2 coins that I have left over at the end of the game, or this one would give me 1 point per influence that I've moved up on this track, noting that I would need to remove these discs in order to move my influence tracker past them. Now, round end is triggered when any two of these furnaces are emptied from their glass, and when that happens, we are going to be doing a scoring, and so players are going to be collecting points along the way, and at the same time, the Napoleon invasion is going to be heading towards us. And it's when one of those players crosses paths with a Napoleon army that it's going to trigger end game, and we do some final scoring. That's a lot about the game. Now let's talk about how it feels to play it.
Well, the first thing to say about this is, for me at least, the theme is something that drew me in, this concept of glass making, and also the fact that historically it sort of said, after the earthquake, we've been to Lisbon, we've heard all of the story in person, and so there's that element there. But they actually have included, as part of the game, a complete separate little booklet with a full kind of timeline of the Stevens factory and all of the things that kind of happen as a consequence. And I really appreciated all of the details about the way of looking after the workers and the way of trying to kind of create that community, and how strong they were actually able to kind of even hold steady as the Napoleonic invasion was happening, to the point where they even kind of survived as much as possible after that was
gone.
Yeah,
so interesting that one person's entrepreneurial spirit, trying to be opportunistic after the earthquake and probably make a lot of money, then turned into something that really transformed the community, the Portuguese community there, and created all of this industry that was a bit of a byproduct of the glass manufacturing. So I found that super fascinating as well. This was on my most anticipated games for Essen Spiel. And when we opened it and I got to read that booklet, I was just really delighted by the amount of information in there. Even though I don't need the theme to enjoy the game, it certainly built that anticipation for okay, I kind of understand what this is, trying to replicate. And even, we don't really like games that have a kind of war element, but this was a fact of the time that, the factory was being set up and all this economy was happening while there was this invasion that was kind of headed towards Lisbon, which of course then fundamentally changed things again after the earthquake. So it's just a fascinating perspective of a point in time. Now, the first thing that surprised and delighted us about this game is the economic flow of the game. It is not a difficult game by any means. In fact, it's, kind of a mid-weight Euro. But what's really interesting is what they're able to achieve with such a simple action mechanism. And the most interesting thing is the things that you generate, or the things that you're investing in order to produce these other materials, creates this economy in which the things you're creating are not things that you can use to fulfill your contracts. In fact, you have to sell them to these small shops and have them out there in the world for other people to grab before you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Normally, I don't love that in a game. I don't love the idea of putting all this work in to generate this, but in this instance, it gives you a lot of benefits, and you need those benefits in order to set yourself up for the next round of the game. So this income generation is really important, but it's also the way of putting, resources out into the game so that people can get what they need to get done in terms of the contracts.
Yeah, I also really appreciated that there's also a cost. So there's an acknowledgement of the cost of resource drain that you're depleting or exploiting of the local kind of the forest or even the dunes. And so as you are activating those production lines, because they also activate in a really interesting way, as you're activating them, you're going down in those tracks, which not only are they worth points at the end, so you're like, oh, well, maybe, as I'm activating, if I get professions that are going to help me move up. So for example, this one is pay 2 coin. When this gets activated, so when someone takes that cube, this whole line will activate, pay 2 coins to move up the forest track. That's one thing, but you may not actually get enough opportunities if you've really exploited too much. And if you get to the point where you're too low, you're not going to even be able to activate that. So I like that there is an acknowledgement of the cost of that, and that there's a tension in that as well.
Yeah, and it's not just for the materials as well. For example, this investment card, every time a round end comes around and we do end of round scoring, it's going to give you 3 victory points, but every time it activates, it's going to cost you 1 on this forest track. So you have to work out, is this ongoing benefit at the end of every round really worth what I need to do between rounds in order to build that back up again? Now that's really the mechanical heart of the game, or the mechanical theme, if you will, is always the tension between a short-term grab. So for example, I could just get this blue piece of glass that's going to help me fulfill a contract, or a long-term investment in the profession specifically, because these professions are really interesting. So let's talk about them in more detail. When I draft one of these professions, there are 3 that have the image on the right, and they are going to be placed on the right hand side of the board. There are 3 with the image on the left, and they can only be placed on the left hand side of the board. So when I want to buy one, for example, I could purchase this one here just for 1 coin, and its ongoing ability when it's activated is that I can spend 2 coins in order to get 1 influence. Now the choice of where to place this is interesting. So I could unlock a disc to put this on here. I could simply place it here, and if I played it here, every time someone takes a piece of green glass, it's going to activate all of these cards here. So I could place it there, or I could place it in this small factory, which I think I've been calling small shop. You can place it at this small factory, and then when anyone takes a resource from here, it's going to be activated. But it also gives you 3 victory points instead of just 1 victory point at the end of the game. And the top layer, or this top small factory, is going to give you 5 points for every disc that you have placed there. But there's a tricky little placement rule that you cannot build or place a profession card here until there are more in the shop or factory that's underneath, unless you have unlocked the ability so that you can have an equal number of professions on both layers.
So the cool thing about this, though, is that then you have this gamble as well of, well, yes, what ability do I want and which side is it going to sit on? But also these rows are going to be activated way more frequently. And so, yeah, of course, they're going to be giving you less points at the end. But then you kind of start going, well, but this is safe 3 points. These factories may never get activated. Sometimes if there aren't enough resources going there, sometimes all the resources end up going into other areas. And so having that tension, and then as soon as someone places, so if we start building on the top layer, that is like, that's 5 points per worker that you have there. As soon as someone places a double one, it's like, I am going to be your apprentice. I am coming over, and you shall teach me everything that you know. So that actually, I found even like the banter that it generated, going, hey, who wants to come over here? Because at the end of the game, you're also going to get a point for every one of those cards where you are the one on top, where you are the master that has been teaching other people. Yeah, the other people are going to get the other points, but you get an extra point. So that's an extra bonus.
Now, this engine building element is one of my favorite aspects of the game, because as the game goes on, all of these professions are going to build up. So you have this whole row of abilities and freebies that people can use. And as soon as that gets activated, it activates for everybody. Yeah. And so then you're constantly thinking, oh, I really need that thing over there. But if I do that, well, Maggie's actually going to benefit more from me activating that row of professions than I am. And so it's like, oh, as this positive interaction that occurs. And
like they're like, there's positive.
there's positive interaction.
Because I was like, that was actually probably the element that felt the most thematic to me. Because you really do feel like you're creating a collective economy and you're all benefiting in some ways, which thematically links back to, like, there was so much of this was around creating like that education of the workers, and even in the time off, it's like, oh, in order for them not to like fall into bad habits, there was a lot of emphasis on like, well, maybe we'll have activities of music and theater and arts and things like that. And so I got that sense from playing the game in that way.
And then, of course, when you're placing out your discs, you're taking them off your player board, and so you are unlocking things. I'll talk briefly about this because I feel like, you know, we played this so many times, and really I kind of created a structure in which I would unlock these things. I don't think it's that variable. I wish it was, there was a little bit more going on here. Like there were more different tracks that you would need to unlock, and then perhaps that would guide your strategy more. But for the most part, there are things that you really need to unlock, and everyone's kind of unlocking them at the same time. So it doesn't feel that interesting to me until you get to the end game scoring conditions, where some people might want to, you know, kind of go towards certain things. So if you're doing 1 point per 2 coins, because you're able to generate a lot of coins, well, then that's your strategy for the end game. And so, yeah, I wish there was a bit more variation on here. I feel like I was unlocking them in a similar pattern.
I originally got excited. It was like, oh, this is like almost like a mini tech tree, but it's like they're very micro little, like, oh, some of them have a requirement of one before the other, but they do become very same from game on game.
And that's also because there's not many of them. And for the most part, in most games, you will unlock most of them. And so it doesn't make it as interesting to have differential powers. And that leads us into probably our biggest criticism of this game is the variability. Because this game does start to feel a little bit samey. Because at the core of it, it's actually very simple. And that's both something that I love about it. It's really easy to get into. I feel like I could teach this so quickly and easily. And if you like Euros, it's super satisfying. So I'm back into the things I like about it.
And the turns are pretty quick because of that.
Yeah, but then on the flip side, there's not much that's changing game on game. There are certainly different ways that you're unlocking things, and every time it feels satisfying, but there's not like, you know, a lot of variation in the contracts or the investment cards that's going to feel like a completely different experience every time you play.
The other element of this that I wish they had done is every time we have a reset phase, which is when, you know, 2 of these furnaces are empty, we have to go through a full set of, like, there's quite a lot of steps to that. It's like kind of like an end around cleanup sort of thing. I wish that had been printed on the board. Like, they do have a little tile that walks you through them in like 2 on both sides, because it's all of these steps plus all of these steps. But that should have really, like, there's plenty of space on the board. That really should have been on the board, and it would have made the flow a lot faster. I feel like the other element that was a missed opportunity is with the investments and the contracts, particularly with the investments. I feel like, and even with this, like, I never really got thematically, like, yes, they've given a name for, oh, well, you know, this is bottles and this is plate glass, but that doesn't really ever really matter, and during the gameplay, to the point where it's like, even before recording, we're like, wait a second, what is that?
What are these cubes?
Because it's like, it really doesn't matter. It just becomes a color. And same within these ones. It's like there was a missed opportunity here for these investments to have been an actual thing that requires that particular combination. Like, for example, I'm thinking of woodcraft, where you actually then become that little bit more immersed of like, oh, I'm gonna make this particular thing, and so I need these elements. And I don't think, it would have added to it, but to the design and the development of it, but it really, like, it's just there, like, it almost was. And even when we're fulfilling the contracts, it's like, oh, it's, you know, I'm making this thing for the crown, or I'm making this particular thing.
And I also want to talk about a bit of the design of the cards. The contracts are great because as you build them up, there's this funky scoring at the end where it's all about the different cubes that you have in each column, and that acts as, and the number of cards you have in the column is going to be the multiplier. So it's a little bit tricky, but essentially you want the columns to all be stacked on top of each other. That is the same when you're producing increasing over here as well. So when you have a whole column, you're able to activate it, and some of the cards have a cost associated with them. But because of the design and where the cost is, you can't really layer those cards in the same way. So it's a very odd choice, because it means that you need to build that investment side of the board out further. And it is a little bit of a table hog, because you just need the space for both cards on both sides of every player board, and this very long, skinny player board, which I actually kind of like the design of this board, but it is, you know, you need to have space for it. I can barely reach the top of the board.
Now, in terms of the number of players, now we've played this at the higher player count. So we started playing it at the sort of 3 and 4 player count, which actually is quite fun, because there's a lot going on in that community and that sort of collective economy side of things. And there's a lot of things that you can piggyback on, or, you know, there's a lot more things being activated. And then we kind of brought it back to like when we started playing just the 2 of us, and it's like, oh, it's a much more subdued game, and it's a much more straightforward. Oh, well, there's this and there's that. I felt like it still worked well at 2, but is nowhere near as engaging and interactive as it is from even just 3 onwards.
I do think it's much better at the higher player counts. I still enjoy my time at 2, but it's just like it becomes more like a tug of war. Whereas, you know, when you've got more players, sometimes only 2 players are represented by one of these small factories. And so anyone activating that, it's only benefiting some people around the table and not others. And it feels like you're working with each individual in a slightly different way around the board. And so I really liked that level of interaction.
Now, in terms of the solo mode, there is a solo mode that comes in the shape of this sort of automa with different cards. So they're going to be given all these discs, which will be kind of released in order. There's a little kind of reset tracker, and there's also levels of difficulty, which are going to be based on the game will end when the Napoleonic invasion reaches particular points. So obviously, it's for an easier game, it's going to give you more time. For a harder game, it's going to give you less time, and then you're trying to hit particular score brackets within that. And then in terms of how it works, it's really just an automa that is not going to be collecting its own points. It's just trying to, on its turn, affect the board in some way to try and replicate another player messing around with the board, taking professions. So you just can be revealing it, and then it's going to say, well, this is if it's able to take cubes from here, that's going to be its preference, and it's obviously going to activate that row. Or it's going to be taking some of the contracts, or it's going to be adding cubes. So I found that it's fairly streamlined in its implementation, but it was just still enough steps that it meant that at the time I sort of reveal the card and go, okay, I remove that, let's activate that, and then go back to my turn. It was still just enough that I was like, oh, wait a second, so what was I doing? So it did, again, it's a it's fairly streamlined, but it's just still, there's enough facilitation that I still kind of got lost. I do love that they included these scenarios. So they have all these different kind of challenge scenarios, which is like, okay, try and get these particular scores with these conditions. So like they might have limitations, like it's going to end when the Napoleonic army reaches particular things, and then, some of these things are not going to be available, or your track will start, in this particular spot. So I enjoy that as a way of giving you ways of exploring the game with different focus in mind, because I will say, even though we felt like after playing it a while, it's like, it starts getting a little bit repetitive. I thought, and I still enjoy my time every time I play it.
Same.
Every time that you play, you do get to go, let me try this particular strategy. It's not like you're locked into always having to do the same thing every single game. So there is that discovery and that exploration. So I love that they've added those challenges and scenarios to give you some things to focus on, and almost like a little mini quest for the game.
So if you can't tell already, this game really charmed us. In fact, it sits in the collection in a really interesting space, and one that I really appreciate more and more these days. So we love a heavy game, but sometimes you just want to get a game that is like easy to get to the table, that you can teach really simply. It's not going to play forever in a day. This game was about half an hour per player. That's what it said on the box, and we timed it, and it absolutely was. So you can get into it and have this really satisfying experience that doesn't have the rules overhead, and it reminds reminds me in feel of the similar weight to Newsford. Now, a lot of people love Newsford because it is giving you that Euro satisfaction with a low rules overhead and, you know, a pretty easy setup. And because this game is fairly consistent game to game, but each of the turns is really satisfying, that's why it reminds me of that. And for that reason, I really enjoyed my time with this game. I want to keep it in our collection because it just plays that really nice role of like, hey, yeah, you want a beer game experience? Well, maybe I'll level up some of my friends to this, or maybe it's just for the heavy gamers that just want something equally satisfying in less time. So I'm giving it 8.2.
Nice. Well, I actually had a similar experience. I found myself going, even though there were elements, I'm like, oh, this is a missed opportunity. Thematically speaking, like where I could have been even more immersed. Every time I went through, like I did feel that sense of like we are creating this sort of community together, and we are all kind of like upskilling together. And so, and every time you're making a decision, it felt satisfying. It wasn't like, it was a good kind of tension. It wasn't like I've got nothing good to do. So for that reason, I'm actually going to be exactly like you. I'm going to give it an 8.2 as well.
So that is our review of Stevens. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.